Hi, everyone. Welcome to Career Lab Q1 2023. I have yet to make a mistake on 2023 and to call it 2022, and it feels really strange, but I think it's because I slow down. Um, I am really happy to welcome you to our session on Q&A with a recruiter. Before we officially start, though, I just want to do a quick check-in and kind of tell you where we're at. This is day one. We just saw each other yesterday for the kickoff, but this week is focused on getting you the interview. So mostly LinkedIn, though you might have questions about your resume. You might have questions about, you know, anything that has to do with picking a job to apply to and how to apply to it and how to put yourself out there. So this is the week to really focus on that. Make sure that if you haven't already done it, get started looking at the how to tell your story and how to set up your LinkedIn. Go through those two async sessions as soon as you can, because you want to get your profile in some kind of shape. Doesn't have to be finished, never going to be finished. We talked about that before I started recording, that you're always going to be tweaking and then coming back months later going, oh, I don't like that anymore. So you're going to change stuff all the time, but get it into some sort of form and send it off to your partner that you've been paired with for your LinkedIn review by Wednesday. And the reason we picked that day was because then they get a day or two to look at it, and then you can still meet with them before Saturday or Sunday, and we launch into week two. So the sooner you do that, the better. And I think that's about it. If you have any other questions about anything else in the repo, just shoot me a message on Slack anytime. No problem. If you can't find something, if something doesn't work, there's a dead link, please let me know. I haven't heard yet, so maybe I did really well this week. We'll see. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Yosha. She's a former recruiter in tech with a ton of experience who's now working in tech. So she's seen both sides of this. So she's going to be a great resource. Get your questions ready. And without further ado, Yosha, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Shelly, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Hopefully, I can provide you all with some tips, some tricks, anything that I've learned through my experience as a recruiter. I used to work at companies such as Shopify. I've worked at Zapier before as well. And then I went to a smaller startup. Then after startup life, I realized I needed a little bit of a break and took some time off, figure out what I like to do. So I'm actually also in the process of learning front end, which is challenging but fun. So yeah, I'm here, happy to answer any questions.
You're muted, Shelly.
I'm just talking to the screen.
Oh,
So no one
perfect.
has a question yet. I love the challenging but fun description of what it is that we do. Both of those are exactly spot on. Um, we're not doing anything formal. You guys can put a question in the chat if you have it, or I'll just make up questions, or any of the mentors are welcome to. We just want to get some ideas out there and see what you're thinking.
Questions you have, you've been putting your stuff together and applying for things. Are you like, is that right? Or how does this work? I'm sure there's that.
Oh, I have a question. So in terms of let's say applications to companies, so like that first point of contact, um, how do resumes stack up against LinkedIn in terms of what a recruiter would look for? Because LinkedIn seems like we could be so much more comprehensive with the information and present information so much better versus trying to fit everything into a one-page resume. Do you have a preference, and which one would you say would be more important, at least for that first contact?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm assuming that there is a posting up, right? And you've applied to this specific job. Is that the context?
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so resume is usually first touch point for me. I usually get a good foundational understanding of, okay, does this person have the particular skills that are necessary for this job, just as a base level. But my job as a recruiter is to also go above and beyond. So past that resume, LinkedIn, GitHub, looking at portfolio websites specifically, I find a lot of really great, valuable information about the individual. What have they done? What are they interested in? What challenges have they faced through their journey? And how have they overcome them? So I'd say standard resume is great, but I want to say typically if recruiters want to get a better understanding of the individual story and their journey, LinkedIn and a portfolio website is a better way for that.
Okay, thank you. And that actually you actually just went right into my second question, which was how much of GitHub and portfolio pages would recruiters look at? So I know like if you're into front end now, so you may have an inclination more towards reading code, but for the average recruiter, how deep would you get into like a GitHub repository?
Yeah, I'll be very transparent. When I was recruiting specifically for engineering, I didn't go that deep into GitHub. I would rely heavily on the engineering managers or the folks that I was working with to give me a little bit more insight on that. Now, this is just my experience, so take that with a grain of salt because there are recruiters that dive in a little bit deeper. But at the same time, there are also recruiters that don't dive that deep into GitHub, but it is super valuable either way.
I can kind of chime in from the engineering manager standpoint on that a little bit. By the time it comes to me, I will poke through GitHubs, but I'm not necessarily looking for, I'm not really looking at your project. Generally, say I'm hiring for a React position, I'll look to see, do you have some examples of React? Okay, they know how to write React. But more so what I'm looking for there is that you have, like I'm trying to get an idea of who you are. And I think GitHub's a really great area you can display who you are. So if your projects all have a beautiful README, if your projects have issues that you want to tackle next on the project, if you have good comments in your code, if you have a README that, very cleanly links me out to some of your stuff, like your own personal README, that's the kind of stuff I'm looking for. Because say, for example, I have this beautiful GitHub profile and it doesn't have to have tons of contributions, but it just has really solid pieces of work there that are robust and beautiful. And then I have somebody else apply who has nothing. I'm kind of like, I don't know anything about that person, but I know this person really well by now. So I'm more inclined to feel like that's going to be a better fit. So I would say, make sure there's a couple good examples up there of who you are and how you work. So like, even if you have merge requests to yourself, the document, this is how I write a pull request. This is how I write a README. That's good stuff for us to see.
Yeah, I actually started adding issues based on one of your previous videos, just to show that, okay, this is a work in progress. This is me just writing notes to myself, try to make it a bit more public. Yeah.
That's such a cool idea. I've never heard of that. So writing issues for your own project of what your steps are that just document your progress here and going forward. Like that.
Yeah, using like in the same way we do at Collab Lab, I'll do it on my projects too, is using GitHub projects as your project management source shows people that you know how to organize a project and you know how to work on a project coherently, which we all know when we're working on our own personal projects are not always coherent. Like, I'm going to poke on this, I'm going to poke on that, and then it's scope creep and we never get it all the way done. So it's a good way to demonstrate that you're just good at working, which is one of the biggest parts of joining a team.
That's awesome. We have another question in the chat, which I have strong feelings about, so I can't wait to hear what you say, Yosha. And that is, how do you feel about cover letters?
Okay, I hate cover letters and I despise organizations that ask for cover letters because in my personal opinion, again, take this with a grain of salt, I think it's just unnecessary labor on the person applying. However, there can be value added if you are earlier in your career where you're telling, your brief story about why you decided to maybe pivot or choose this occupation. I don't think it's necessary. So again, take that with a grain of salt. I'm personally not a big fan.
Now, do you hate reading them or you just hate when they're required?
I hate when they're required. Yeah, I think it's unfair. for companies to put that on someone who's applying, because looking for a job, interviewing, that whole process is very much mentally taxing. So I think, you know, if we're thinking about the individual, let's make the a barrier to entry a little bit less, and then let's evaluate them on their actual skills and then see how it goes.
I like that. I'm a big fan of writing them, not necessarily having them required. If there's something that's really sparked about this job description, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm such a perfect fit for a weird reason. Because I definitely got a couple of great interviews for things that maybe I wasn't qualified for or wouldn't look like the normal candidate. But you know, it was an education tool, an ed tech company, and it was a tool that I used when I was a teacher. And I'm like, they need to know this. And I'm not, you know, putting a page of it in my resume. So I like them for that reason. But I like your perspective because
I love that. I love that. I love it as an optional as
Mhm.
an optional requirement, right? Or not requirement, optional thing. And exactly that, when there's something like when there's a story that you want to tell that there's just not enough room on your resume to display that, I think a cover letter is a great opportunity.
Cool. And speaking of resumes, let's have the age-old conversation about length and depth. Just right off the just surface thoughts on that. We'll probably dig deeper in a little
Yeah,
bit.
I'd say, you know, 1 to 2 pages are perfectly fine. I'd probably say 2 page max. Um, and then in terms of what I'm looking for, what really stands out to me in a resume, it's tough to tell the full story in a resume, right? Because you want to be concise, you want to be clear. But then you also want to share your accomplishments. I think any sort of way where you can share, or I mean, even add like a section of like accomplishments specifically. How were you able to optimize a specific thing? What value were you able to contribute? Things like that. And I find for me as a recruiter, give me a really good insight of like, okay, you're thinking about the bigger picture. And then, you know, as obvious, also it comes down to technical skills, right? Like, so what languages, what tools are you comfortable with? But I think an accomplishment section is a really great way to showcase your ability and what you're also interested in.
That's awesome. I think that probably answers this next one too. What do you look for in a resume to proceed? So I think you nailed it. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for keeping tabs on the chat, because I completely
Oh,
forgot that that was there.
oh yeah, no, definitely. That's my job. You just think and talk. Here's another one. What would you say is something that made a candidate stand out when you first met them?
Mm. So, you mean in terms of like the first interview, is that the context?
Yeah, let's say you've ticked off the resume and the LinkedIn and you're having that first
The first
contact
convert.
before you go to an official interview with the team or something.
Yeah, I find that people who do really well in the organizations that I've worked at, they have this ability to reflect on their experiences and articulate them in a way where they were very transparent about some of the challenges that they were facing, their ability to also ask for help, and then be able to also solve that issue. It doesn't necessarily always have to be solved, but I think the ability of reflection and self-awareness in an interview process really stands out for me, because then that shows me, okay, this person will also be really well equipped to work within a team. And even though a lot of the work that you folks do and we do can be siloed and you're very much alone, there still requires a certain level of um, communication and problem solving that will make you successful. So just to kind of wrap that up and sum it up, I'd say their ability to reflect, clearly articulate some of the challenges that they faced just throughout their journey. And yeah, the self-awareness piece.
I love that. That really like ties into exactly how I feel about it as well. So for the record, when somebody gets to me, they've already been vetted by recruiting, and so they're already like a good bet and stuff. But for me, what I look for is somebody who can, again, articulate their experiences really well. Lean hard into the STAR methodology when you're explaining your experiences, because what wows me is when, I'll start with saying what doesn't wow me. What doesn't wow me is when somebody comes into an interview and they just sound like they're bullshitting. They're just throwing a bunch of jargon. They're just skirting around things that may or may not have happened to them. And you can tell when you're like, that's probably not your story, or this probably wasn't actually very significant, and you're over indexing on it. So what wows me in contrast to that is when they come in, I would recommend you all have 6 to 10 stories that you've buttoned up really well that can kind of become an answer to anything, because they touch on so many different things, and rehearse those and have those ready so that you can just naturally talk about them when asked a question. And again, lean into the STAR framework. And on top of that, one thing that totally wows me is when somebody ends everything they tell me with what they would have done better or what they would do next time. Like, it again shows that they're really reflective, shows that they're open to feedback and willing to grow and change. So you'd say, I was working on a team where we had this specific project, like give details. Here was the specific challenge. Here's how it worked out. Next time though, going forward, I think what I might try is this specific thing, and like be really specific rather than, in contrast, being like, yeah, I worked on a team once where we were improving accessibility, and turns out it took a lot longer than we thought that it was going to. And so we just didn't get a lot of the stuff done. Like, okay, that could have literally been anybody's story ever. Like, tell me specifics. What actually did you do? What actually happened? So be prepared with specifics and be open to growth, like Yasha was saying.
Yeah, you've now, having done your shopping lists in the last 8 weeks, you have like all of those stories somewhere, right? You've done those things where there was some kind of conflict where you didn't agree with your partner. You've had to make some decision about a tech because the package you wanted to use has now been updated and it doesn't talk to anything else anymore. You know, you've had, you're laughing, Nina, because I know it happened to you, right? So you've had all of those little tidbits, and they can be little. You don't have to say, I spent 6 months doing X. It could be, we spent 2 hours doing X, you know, and banging our head against the wall, and this is how we fixed it. Doesn't matter how big or small they are, but you've got all those stories. So get them ahead of time. Get them, you know, mine them for all of their little possible branches and threads. And they're all fresh in your mind right now. So it's kind of perfect
Honestly,
too.
on top of that, like, get those stories now while they're fresh, so that like when you're giving these stories, even if you're in a job fit interview, this is your chance to show that you're technical too. And if you can articulate those technicalities really well, you're like feeding 2 birds with 1 stone, right? You're like having a really rich interview that that person who's interviewing you is going to take and tell other people about. So they might go tell their, you know, technical manager or whatever, oh, they actually knew what they were talking about. They weren't like, you should aim for your stories to have me not respond like, oh, it sounded like they were just making shit up. I should be like, who would make that up? That is very specific. So yes, use
Yeah,
it
and
as an
maybe
opportunity to be technical.
get lost in the weeds every now and then. Much better to apologize and say, oh, sorry, I just totally nerded out on something, because it proves that you actually did it, you know, and that you cared about it and it was enough that you could go off on a tangent. I feel like that's just all personality and commitment in, you know, one rambling sentence. Maybe that's just me because I like to ramble. Okay, we've got a bunch more. So let's jump in again to our chat list. I've been struggling to get interviews, and advice I've been given is to send a message to the recruiter of the company. Does receiving messages on LinkedIn really get you noticed? And is your resume looked at, or do you just ignore them? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I've spoken to a bunch of my recruiter friends about this topic in the past as well. And I think the context that's usually missing from questions like this is understanding, okay, there's usually an influx of resumes that have come in for a specific job, right? It could be anywhere from 100, 300, 500 plus. depending on the organization and their visibility. Now, if that recruiter is also working on more than one role, which is highly likely, unfortunately, reaching out to them on LinkedIn doesn't necessarily, I don't think is the best way. Only because I know a lot of folks just don't have the capacity to go through their LinkedIn messages on top of the resumes that have come in. So it's a tough one. I think the tip that I typically give folks if they do want to leverage LinkedIn messaging is try to find the hiring manager actually on LinkedIn versus the recruiter. Typically, they won't have as many folks reaching out to them, and they might actually have capacity maybe to even review your resume or even for like a quick conversation. And if you're able to have a conversation with the hiring manager, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a step ahead, and then they can connect you with the recruiter. So there's an option. So just to kind of summarize that, I know it's tough. Market is always really difficult, especially when you're trying to break into an industry. It is super challenging. Recruiters are not always the best path in terms of LinkedIn messaging. It's an option. But I'd say if you're able to do a little bit of research on the company, find the person hiring for the role, maybe that might be the best way to get in contact with someone.
So for me, I get tons of LinkedIn messages and I do not read anything until I'm hiring, in which case I'm actually on LinkedIn. Like the only time I go on LinkedIn is if I'm hiring. And so I think Yosha's totally right. Like find the hiring manager because they're on LinkedIn if they're hiring. But if they're not hiring and you don't get a response from them, it's not because you did anything wrong. It's just because there's a lot. And so I agree with Yosha.
This is a little bit of an extension on that same thing. If you're applying via LinkedIn, right? So those apply now buttons, do those actually go anywhere? And if so, should the applicant treat that any differently than applying on the company website or whatever, like who they would follow up with and stuff?
Yeah, it shows up the same way actually because of the integration. So whichever system, applicant tracking system that the company or the recruiter is using, if you apply via LinkedIn or if you apply directly to their website, it shows up the same way. The only difference is the data that's being collected. So understanding, okay, where did this person apply from? Is that from directly from the company website or is that specifically from LinkedIn? So it does show up the same way.
Awesome. Okay, what are your thoughts on putting time frames on your skills on your resume? I'm putting time frames on anything actually, education, previous non-tech jobs, things like that.
Yeah. So specifically for skills, I don't think that's necessary. I don't always think the time frame is a good indicator of the ability of someone to apply that specific skill. Now, again, I'm not the one necessarily evaluating technical skills, but I don't think it's necessary. So you don't have to put the time frame on specific skills that you've acquired. Previous jobs, so the question was like also previous jobs that are not specifically in the industry. I think that's fine, you know, adding that, okay, I've worked at this company from X amount of time to X amount of time, that's totally okay. I would recommend folks not put the time frame of the education specifically. Let's say if it's university, college, unfortunately, the things that I've seen in just hiring, it just allows for discriminatory practices. And I think a way to curb that is just don't include it. It's not important when you graduated. It's important or when you went to school specifically. I think your experience is more important than that. So it doesn't give the opportunity for organizations to discriminate based off of age.
That's good to hear. That's been a conversation that's bouncing around, particularly with ageism of like, if you went to a college a long time ago, went and had one career, now you're doing a second one, does that mean you're not as capable? So good to hear that it's not a negative to keep the dates off. Okay, let's see. Scone. Kill two birds with one scone. You don't make very good scones. Wow. I like that. Okay, two trees with one seed. Oh, that's nice. Let's see. Okay, I have another question. How strict would you be with requirements for years of experience?
This is a really good question. So let's say, me personally, I'm not very strict. I think it depends on the situation, level that let's say that a organization is looking to hire for. But again, years of experience are not always a great indicator of whether or not someone can do this job successfully. There are, I think there might be organizations that are more strict with that, but at the same time, I think if a job says you should have X amount of years of experience and you don't necessarily hit that, I still think you should apply. I've had situations where people have not met the years of experience requirements. But because they've done maybe like really interesting work, it's worth a conversation, and you never know how that can go, right? So now there is there's an exception, right? So if someone is looking for like a director, requires a certain years of experience for that. But I think anywhere from like entry level, mid-level, intermediate, I think that it should be very fluid in terms of years of experience. So for me as a recruiter, I'd say don't hold yourself back if you see there is a years of experience requirement. I'd say apply anyway and then see how it goes.
I think too, adding to that, I mean, a blanket statement for this whole process in general is that it can vary so greatly from company to company, but also don't get discouraged if you do apply for those and get like instant rejections, because sometimes there's filters set up that are like, they didn't meet base criteria, forget about it. Other times, like Yosha was saying, those can just be sort of cookie cutter templates too, that like a hiring manager didn't put together. I personally, if I'm hiring, put together a very specific outline of who I'm looking for, but sometimes people don't do that. And so they could be willing to take many more chances on people just because they didn't really know what they were looking for in the first place. They were just looking. So apply. Don't get discouraged if you get rejected. That will happen, but apply.
Okay, we've got another good one. Is there anything that we can do to prepare for an interview other than getting the stories ready and practicing? So what other things stand out and make an interview go really positively in your experience?
Yeah, I think there's another side to interviewing that we should talk about, and that's feeling empowered to ask organizations questions as well. Because yes, on one hand, you are interviewing to potentially get this job, but you also need to make sure that this organization, this team, the people that you're going to be working with, they align with your values. Because if they don't, it's going to make it very challenging for you to show up to work every single day in the best way and do what you're supposed to do. So I think a little bit of reflection maybe on understanding what is it that you're looking for in a team? What is it that you're looking for in a manager? Does this company align with your values? I think those are important things to reflect on and establish and document before you go into the interview process. And then based off of your values that you've narrowed down, maybe come up with 2 to 3 questions that you can ask every single person that you're meeting through the interview process to help you determine, does this actually make sense for you? So it's equally, you should feel empowered to ask the questions that will be necessary, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people, right? And if you don't like who you work with, or there's not basic level of respect and there's no support for you, I'm sorry, but there's no job that's worth your mental well-being.
And can I follow up on that? I actually asked that question. I think one fear that came up when you were talking, don't be afraid of asking question, was what if I ask the wrong question and then I'm being judged for it? Like, so what would be your advice for not having that fear, or maybe not as much, and getting past that to be able to ask those questions? Or is there like a type of question not to ask, or a way to ask the question? Because I'm like, like I feel a lot of us are probably just like hungry for that position, right? So it's like, I don't want to, I understand that we don't want to be in a team where we're not going to be comfortable, but in this moment right now, it's like I'll be on any team because I just want to be working, right? So so how yeah, so I'll just come back and ask one question. How would you suggest to ask the question without the fear of like losing the opportunity because you asked the wrong question? Yeah.
Right. I think that's fair, and completely valid, especially when you're looking to break into an industry, right? That hunger is so important, and it's very necessary to set a good impression on the folks that you're meeting with. However, I encourage folks to balance that also with, does this still align with what I'm looking for, right? So if you're going into the interview worried about, okay, this might be a stupid question, and if the person that is interviewing you makes you feel that way, that's not the place for you. There is no such thing as a stupid question, especially in an interview setting, and especially when you are breaking into an industry or you're trying to. If anything, if the organization has good values and they've hired good people, they're going to see that as a sign of, oh, okay, this person really cares about the work that they're going to be doing. If we do hire them, they're going to have that same level of care with the people that they work with and then the products that they're working with, right? So is there a specific question on your mind that you would be worried about asking in an interview setting? And maybe I can give you a little bit more guidance on how to word that specifically, because these are all generalizations, right? So maybe I can provide you with a little bit more guidance if it's specific.
Thank you. I don't think that I have a specific question. I think because I've heard a lot of times to ask questions to the interviewer, but at the same time, I'm the type of person that I'm going to be doing a lot of research on whichever company that I'm trying to work for, especially if it's something that I really want to do. So I feel like I'm coming into the interview knowing more about them than they know about me. And I do want the interviewer to feel like I care and that I want to know all these things, but at the same time, I might already know the answer. So is it fair to just ask something that that I was wondering about?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead. They don't know that you know the answer to that, right?
Okay,
So
cool.
you might as well leverage that. And I think if you're looking on guidance on like what type of questions to ask to set a really good impression as well, anything that can help you learn about, okay, what does success look like for this person when they jump into the position, right? What are some of the expectations for this person to accomplish within 6 months to a year? What is the business trajectory? Like what are they excited about? And then that way it'll show them that you are invested in your own growth, but you're also invested in the growth of the organization, which translates really, really well in an interview setting. And then if anybody's penalizing you for that, you don't want to work at that company.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. I'll definitely be using those questions.
It's so true. I mean, you don't want to be too picky in that first job, right? Because you got to get the salary, you've got to get on the road, on the path. But at the same time, you have to interview them as well. I got this advice somewhere, and then I started putting it into play, and I loved it. I can't remember where it was, but basically, you're doing all your research, right? So you've read about the company values, you've read about the things that are important to them. So turn the tables. Well, I read that your company values are X. Can you give me an example of how that plays out in a day for you or a day for a person in this role? So you have just like told them you've done your research, told them you care about your company, told them that their values align with you. So you told them about yourself, but you've also said, okay, I need you to prove to me that it's really happening, right? And it's the question you ask, so you're showing what's important to you. When people ask really vague questions, just like Stacey was saying, when you give those vague responses, if you ask a vague question, you don't sound as committed, or they just don't get as much information from you. But if you ask a question, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, some company I applied for that I didn't get a job at, I think one of their values was intrapreneurship or something. And what that meant. So I said, I read in your values X. Can you tell me more about what this means to you personally? Right. So it sounds like a thoughtful question. I really wanted to know what that meant. And then if it was real, like if they had a real response or just some boring pat response because they didn't care. For me, I'm all about the people. I had to work with people that cared. And so I asked questions that let them show me if they cared or not. And I could tell by their responses that, oh yeah, this is a people place, or this is a place that cares about X, Y, or Z. So yeah. So if you've done, and also I just love the fact of just ask what you know what the answer is and see if they say the same thing. It's so good. Okay, we have a bunch more. Let's see. What have been ways candidates' applications have caught your interest? I think that got addressed in a few. Oh, any advice on ATS systems and getting past them to get your resume in front of a set of eyes?
So, maybe I can get a little bit more context on this question in particular. So is the assumption that the ATS system is automatically rejecting or moving people forward before a recruiter is seeing the resume? Is that correct?
Tina, this one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So with the ATS systems that I've worked with, we haven't necessarily used a auto decline option. So every resume or everybody that applies to the specific job, I've looked at their resume. Now, the challenge here is when you do apply to larger organizations, let's say maybe it's the Facebooks, the Amazons, etc. They might have, now I don't know for sure, but I feel like based off the conversations I've had with folks that have worked there, they have auto decline options that may be set to years of experience or a specific programming language that this person doesn't meet, right? So I don't know if there's any advice I can give you on that. It just really depends on the company that you're applying to. How large are they? If it's a smaller organization, there's more of a guarantee that the recruiter is looking at every single resume.
I would say make sure you have the tech stack listed somewhere. I mean, if you don't have the time or the energy or the ability to really cater every single resume, make sure that one line somewhere includes the tech stack in a natural way. Don't just put a line somewhere that has the tech, but built a project. If they want the MERN stack, say, built a project with and all the MERNs that you used, so that those words at least get ticked off at bare minimum. This is an interesting question, and I don't know if you can answer it because it's kind of specific. It's based on the year's experience again. Requirements for things like internships that are for current students. If you're not actually a current student, maybe you've been out for a little while, do you know how strict companies tend to be with those types of requirements?
It honestly really varies because I've seen internship requirements or internship postings where there's no requirement for the amount of experience or even having a degree in that specific area. And then I have seen requirements where it's like, okay, at least a year of working with this specific tech stack, or you have to have a CS degree. It really depends, and usually the internship posting will give you a little bit more insight on that. But I'm very much of the philosophy, I think you should apply anyway, even if you don't have all of the things. You never know what's going to happen, and it doesn't hurt.
So that one was my question. It was more in terms of internships that are directed at students, are they not allowed to hire if you're not a current college student, or things like that? I've gotten rejected for some because I already have my degree and I'm not a current student.
Yeah, that would depend, on the organization. Some are stricter than others. Some require you to be enrolled in a CS degree, and some don't even require that. So,
Okay.
yeah, so it's very flexible. I personally think that there should be a variety of internship options. I don't necessarily think you need to be enrolled in a CS degree to be a great engineer. But again, some companies don't necessarily agree with that. So it does vary.
So basically apply and see
Yeah.
if you get through to one of
And
them
yeah,
where they're more flexible.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Stacy, I guess, had to leave, and before she left, she said, definitely do this learning module. I forgot to mention that the 2 async modules that you're supposed to be doing right about now is what to ask your interviewer and stuff like that. So definitely make sure you look into that one. Okay, what is your advice? I love this one because this is so me. What is your advice to not come across as too desperate in an interview or too enthusiastic or too whatever? When I'm asked if I feel capable of doing something or if I'm interested in certain areas, how do I convey that I'm capable of tackling any task without saying, I can do anything you need? How'd I do, Amanda? Did I get the manic in there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's tough, right? Because you want to communicate that you're excited. You want to communicate your abilities, but there's also it feels like there's a shot clock that you're up against a specific amount of time and you have to get this thing. This one is tough because I struggle with this as well. I think coming off too eager is, I actually think that's better than someone who has shown no interest at all. And especially if it's, let's say, if you're applying for an internship or a more junior entry level position, I think that's on the responsibility. It's the responsibility of the recruiters and the people that are hiring to have a certain level of understanding. Like, okay, this person is trying to get in. Of course, they're going to be excited. Of course, they're trying to tell me all the things that they've done. So I wouldn't say take too much of that responsibility on you to figure out, okay, how can I seem less eager? I think if you're excited, that's incredible. I think if you found a way to communicate that in a way that's concise, and I think that should reflect better on you versus if you didn't really come off that interested in the interview, right? So for example, I've had folks that I've had interviews with where it felt like they just were passing the time with me. And I'm like, we have all got stuff to do. So I can give you some time back if you don't want to be here. Of course I didn't say that, but and then I've had interviews with folks who have been like super excited, and like that energy in itself is very infectious. And that gives me a good understanding, like, okay, this person cares. Under all of that, they care. So it may not always work out in that way, but I think I and the folks that I've worked with, a lot of the hiring managers, they see that as a sign of, okay, this person is committed. So I don't think you should necessarily see that as a bad thing. And I apologize if this is not very helpful, but I just hope that I can encourage you to kind of leverage and channel that enthusiasm and in a way where it will help you through the interview process. So I think as long as you're being clear with your experience, concise, and you have shown a certain level of interest, you'll be okay.
Because I'm thinking specifically of a time when they asked me, what is my focus more? And I tend to lean more front end, but I think in that moment I was also like, but I can also do back end.
Right.
Like, I don't want to just say that if you're looking for that, I can do that too, even though it's not,
Don't
I really
pigeonhole
don't
me.
want a back end position, but
Yeah, no,
solely,
for
but
sure. I think that's the best way to answer that. So if you know specifically they're hiring for this experience, you can always answer that question, you know, I do have a preference for front end, for example, but where I'm at in my stage of my career, I'm absolutely open to learning back end. Keep it as simple as that, just so that you're show that you're willing to learn, even if it may not be your first choice. That way it shows, okay, you're flexible.
I have to share an anecdote. And I just remember this is recorded, so now the whole world's gonna know. I was in an interview and I was extremely excited. Everything about this was so perfect. I wanted it so bad, so bad. And the recruiter, actually, it was an HR person. She asked me a question, and I don't have any idea why, but it triggered an emotional response, and I started to cry. And then because I was crying, she started to cry. There was just way too much emotion going on into this thing. So when I say I'm always up here when I interview, it's true. So I got out of that. I mean, we brought it back together. We finished up everything, and I got out of it going, did I just ruin everything? Like I cried in a job interview, like not even the tough tech one that makes everybody cry. No, this was just the behavioral, not even that. It was the first one. I got that job and it was the greatest job ever. And we talked about it and laughed about it afterwards. And what she said was, you're a real person. You had real feelings. Like, how am I ever going to forget you after that? Like, you know? So we had a real moment, which doesn't often happen in this kind of process. So don't crush your personality at all. But just, temper it and make sure you're always giving information as well as personality. Devin, I see your hand. What you got?
Oh, so this is kind of following up on some of the previous questions as well. What if that energy is just kind of reversed and maybe the recruiter is kind of low energy and seems uninterested? So I know you said you're also interviewing the company, but how representative is that recruiter of the company itself? And I ask this in the context of having reapplied to a company. So the first interview I had, the first recruiter was great, and it was because of that I considered applying again. And then the second one was just, it didn't go well. Some of that was on me, but just very early on in the interview, the recruiters, she just seemed kind of uninterested and just kind of in a hurry to get off the call. So, the question is, how much should we, let's say, judge a company based on that one person in that one moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I apologize for that experience because that's terrible. Especially as a recruiter, our job is to make sure people feel comfortable, and we're there to listen and learn. So I hate that you had that experience. Um, this one is a tough one. I'd say maybe take that with a grain of salt. And if you're able to have more conversations with different people in the organization, it'll give you a better sense of what the values are there. But you want to be mindful of that particular experience. You don't want to forget it. You want to be like, okay, this happened before, so let me keep an eye out for this. See if I am able to identify any similar patterns to the interview experience. If I were you in that situation, I don't know how excited I would be to interview at that same company, just transparently. But at the same time, it wouldn't be I wouldn't rule it out entirely. Because it could be that person was maybe having a tough day. Again, we
Yeah.
are all human, right? Maybe they weren't able to show up their best way. But what would be a saving grace is that if they were able to have self-awareness and identify that, and either send you an email saying, hey, I apologize, or if I came off in a certain way, I was having a tough day, etc. If there's some sort of communication around that, I think it'd be a saving grace, but it's a tricky situation.
It was. I mean, it's just the hard thing was that they specifically say wait 1 year before you reapply. And in this sense, the recruiter is pretty much the gatekeeper. So there's no moving forward for me, unless I'm willing to wait another year. But I mean, based on the first interview, I would have gone back again. But based on this one, not so much.
Wait 1 year to apply again?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't like that.
And is it real? I mean, you could
Yeah,
try applying in 4 months and see what happens.
I did actually. They had so after the very first interview, they had an opening for a React developer, which was 8 months afterwards. They caught me and said, "Yeah, just wait, wait a little bit."
So it was real.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of the wait 1 year. But I know some companies have that in place. But yeah, it's a tough situation. I think with time, maybe you'll have interactions that were as positive as the first interaction you had with that first recruiter. Hopefully you don't have to go through that again.
Yeah, hopefully.
Nina had a great question for those of us that are switching industries entirely. Outfit clothing. So coming from corporate, what's okay? What's best practice? Does it matter at all for a tech interview, what you're wearing on screen or in person?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question. So when I used to work in banking, and they had a very strict dress code. And so when I pivoted into tech, everybody was super relaxed in the interview setting. People were in jeans, sneakers, some people were in sweatpants. And I was like, where am I? So I don't think it's super important necessarily to be business casual. Show up how you feel comfortable. And make sure, yeah, I'd say show up how you feel comfortable, right? Like if you're feeling, how do you feel good? When you're feeling good, what specifically do you wear? Wear that. I usually show up in t-shirt. I'm wearing a hat today. This is how I usually show up for interviews as well. So yeah, don't stress about that too much. I think it's more important about the content of the interview and the experience you have that way.
Devin had a great comment where he was actually told ahead of time to dress professionally. And I think if they don't do that, oh, and then the interviewer looked sloppy. Exactly. If we're interviewing virtually, we have the benefit of, you can wear something nice on top and anything on the bottom. Just make sure your camera angle is right if you're going to get up, because you don't want to be the next one on, social media where you stand up and you're wearing shorts, right? But I would do that middle ground. Middle ground's always perfect. Like Devin's got a polo shirt on. It's neat, it's tidy, but it also looks comfortable, So like any top you wear, and just be prepared that the person you're talking to might be wearing a tie, but more likely will be wearing a hoodie, because, that's just the way it is.
I feel
Yeah.
like it's so hard for women. I worked in engineering, so for guys it's super easy. You just wear a polo and you're pretty much good, right? But like I was an engineer in an engineering setting, so I was like kind of wearing their uniform. So like now it's like, okay, well, what's okay for like a woman to look casual? Like I don't know what that looks like. So
I
like,
found it.
oh yeah, I'm listening.
Actually, I wish Stacy were still here. I have to give her credit for it. It's different now. Her look is different, but last year when I first met her, her look was very specific and I totally copied it. She has a plain t-shirt that's like ribbed or whatever in just a bunch of different colors. So it's a short sleeve t-shirt. I think they used to call them shells, but I got them at Target. I don't know where she probably got very nice ones because she's so put together. I'm not. But yeah, just get a handful of nice t-shirts. If there's no graphic on it, and if it has a nice texture, it's neutral. It's the ladies' polo, without the collar. I think that totally goes. And again, they don't know what you're wearing underneath. Yoga pants for the win.
Yep. And you can always ask folks, right? Like before you're going for an interview, you can always ask the recruiter, like, hey, how should I dress? What's the vibe? Maybe don't say exactly what's the vibe, but get an understanding of like what they're looking for. And they'll be able to give you an understanding of, okay, this is, don't even worry about it. Or hey, it's more business casual or XYZ. And then that way you have documentation that they said this is how to show up. So you can use that as leverage if you need to for whatever reason.
One thing I wouldn't do, I guess this is more for the guys, unless they tell you, is don't wear a suit and tie on your Zoom interview because you look like you just graduated from college and you're borrowing dad's suit. You know what I mean? And I'm sorry to everyone, but I've run into a couple of those people in a couple of settings, and I'm like, dude, that doesn't look like the real you. You look 14. So unless that's really what you're going for, avoid the full suit. So we only have a couple minutes left. Anybody got anything else? Don't even own one. And that's okay. Nina, you gonna buy a suit and tie? See, that would be really cute, right? Oh,
I'll
you don't
make
even
it a
need the
look.
jacket, just the tie.
That would be a look.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll be memorable that way for sure.
definitely. Well, this was awesome. We and I got so many great answers and ideas and thoughts and stuff to chew up. Yosha, thank you so much for being open and transparent and so full of a ton of valuable information. I really appreciate it. And I think we'll wrap up. Everybody have an awesome day. Good look on everything and good luck. Good luck. Also, look good and have good luck. There we go. I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. Good luck.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye.